that is okay. At least for the first half, Scott, it'll go on my podcast as well. And then when people open up for the Q&A, it's up to them if they are comfortable with it going on the podcast and if it's so, if I use it. But definitely the first bit is going to be recorded for future use.
Excellent.
Yes.
Even posterity.
Yeah, trying. Okay. I know I'm still waiting for one more person. I wonder why my mic's blurry. There you go.
For these live sessions, like how many people do you typically get out?
It depends. I haven't done one in a while, but could be like this might be all. I think I had about 15 that registered. So yeah, it's not bad. I think it's good.
It's awesome.
Yeah. No, I thank you so much for doing this. So I think I was waiting for Casey and I see that she's joined, so we can get started. So we have Scott from Mad Barn with us today. So everyone, welcome Scott here. And this has just been really awesome because I know personally I have tons of nutritional questions, and just to get better understanding of these type of products that are available to us, because there's such an abundance of knowledge and so many options to choose. So I'm really excited to dive deeper into Mad Barn. So just to get started, to give us a bit of overview of you and your business, can you just give us a bit of history of Mad Barn?
Do you want to like right from the beginning or just the history?
Yeah, like I would love to know how it got started. Like how did it go from there to here, like where you are today?
Yeah, it got started just like growing up around horses. I think like a lot of people, you get bitten by the horse bug young and you fall in love, and then off to school I went, studied nutrition, physiology, biochemistry, and those kind of things. And when you're looking around in the horse industry for proper nutrition, especially as you gain more knowledge in nutrition, it became apparent that there were lots of products on the market, but it seemed like they were either really, really expensive or they were lacking in a lot of nutrients. They're targeted at specific things. So they had high levels of some nutrients, not nearly enough of another. And so it just really seemed like there was opportunity, I guess, to create my own mineral and vitamin, it was just my interest, I guess, is the mineral and vitamin supplementation in particular. And so we did, and we're feeding it to our own horses and using it. And then just, what we call a side hustle today, I was doing that for a number of years while I was working in the industry. And the side hustle got to take up quite a bit of time. And so when I went back to do my PhD, I decided, okay, this either just needs to go away or I need to turn it into a legitimate business. And we turned it into a legitimate business, being Mad Barn, which I guess this now year 6, you're going on to 7. And right. Sound, you're on mute again.
There we go. Sorry. I was gonna say, I remember seeing Mad Barn at either an NBHA or OBRA event in Clinton, and it was brand new. And that probably would have been when you guys were starting out around 5 years ago, I think that was. And it's kind of like, oh, what's this product? And we got to try it out. And it was more local, I guess. And it was just really interesting to see, how you guys have progressed from there to now, and, just getting that exposure. I think it's cool to have to make that decision of, is it going to be legit or is it not? And, look at how far you've come.
Yeah. And like at the end of the day, I mean, the reason behind building Mad Barn it wasn't to come out and sell products to people. It was honestly just the desire to do more research and gain more knowledge in nutrition and physiology. And when I was in school, you see how hard it is to get funding, and particularly in the equine side. And so I made the decision. It's like, well, if I just start my own company and we make our own money, then I can direct the research exactly where it needs to be.
Right.
And we don't have to depend on, the government saying, or government funding bodies saying, well, is this really that important to industry? Like the current endeavor we're on about building a nutritional model that is very, very fundamental. So it's not like it's creating an end product, but it's going to create a foundation that really drives the knowledge base of equine nutrition forward. And it's a long-term thing, and having our own company, and again, the revenue that it generates allows us to do that and carry out this research. So honestly, it's a bit of a dream come true right now. Like the progress we're making and where we're at and where we're heading is probably the most exciting.
Yeah. So with that being said, has there been any really big groundbreaking discoveries that you have found that have maybe been ideated as false before, but now you've kind of proved the point of it being the other way around?
I wouldn't say there's anything like groundbreaking yet. And on the model side, we're just getting underway. So I mean, there's tons of work in front of us. And I don't know that there's gonna be anything groundbreaking. I think fundamentals are still there. We understand the fundamentals, and it's a lot of times it's just a matter of implementing them. Sometimes when we get off track and forget exactly how they should be looked after, how they should be fed, and it gets to be sometimes a little bit more about us and not so much about them. And so it's a lot of what we do is just trying to focus on the horse, meeting their behavioral and nutritional needs. It's it's not just about the chemical components of the diet. They have behavioral needs as well that need to be met from a nutrition standpoint.
Yeah. So with that being said about the fundamentals, can you walk us through some of the major fundamentals that we all should be aware about when it comes to this?
Yeah, for sure. This is again pretty basic. People are like, oh yeah, we know this, but we all know horses need forage, right? But you take a step back from that, and especially the way we keep horses, and this isn't so much nutrition, but the air quality, and particularly this time of year in Canada, anyways, people close up their barns and they want it to be, comfortable for them. Well, what's comfortable for them often causes a lot of problems in air quality, and I think that's again, it's not nutritionally related, but it's often overlooked. So it's worth talking about and bringing it to the forefront because you see a lot of respiratory problems in horses, and a lot of that's driven from dust and ammonia in barns. From a nutrition standpoint, yeah, you want to meet the behavioral needs, allow them to eat 12 to 16 hours a day. And so that means selecting a forage that's appropriate for the level of work they're doing. And I know in that list of questions, this is going to come up later. How do you select the correct forage? And it's really based on what is the horse doing. And so it's a combination of meeting the nutritional needs, meeting the behavioral needs. Salt, we're not horses with enough salt. And again, I guess this is where us as humans, we take human nutrition and we try to put it on horses, where you hear constantly about humans consuming too much salt, and therefore it gets kind of a bad rap. Meanwhile, in the horse population, they're not getting nearly enough. Processed foods really to speak of, well, besides commercial feeds, but even those don't have enough salt. So that's a big one. And then water, and then minerals and vitamins. We just kind of a summary of just under 7,000 diets we evaluated last year. And the key principles of it were we're giving our horses too much energy, too much protein, not enough salt, not enough trace minerals and vitamins in their diets. And so it's really just about correcting that and for the horse.
Yeah, exactly. When you say salt, are you referring to, let's say, if you're just giving a salt block, or are you giving loose salt in their feed, or how would you want people to give that?
Loose salt is the best way to go. Salt blocks are, they're convenience, but a horse in work is not going to be able to consume enough salt off a block. A horse at maintenance, sure, they could probably get enough off the block, but I like loose salt. My suggestion to most people, if they're feeding in a feed tub, is just put it off to the side. Put a teaspoon or a couple tablespoons off to the side of the feed. And if the horse cleans it up in the meal, add more at the next meal until they're leaving some behind. And you're meeting enough of their salt requirements. And free choice loose salt all the time is a great option. So even a separate little bowl in the stall or out in a pasture in a covered shelter with loose salt in it all the time is a great option. Most horses, they do have nutritional knowledge when it comes to salt, or to some level, whereas they don't have nutritional knowledge for any other nutrients really to speak of. So they will regulate their own intake. The best thing we can do for them is provide a ready source. It doesn't need to be anything special. You go to your local feed store, just get good old feed grade salt and use that.
Yeah.
In fact, I would steer away from some of the specialty salts.
Like they have too many additives and stuff, or?
Well, like one of the popular ones now, Himalayan, salt from, and it's because it's got a nice pink color to it. Well, that pink color is iron. Horses do not need extra iron in their diet. And why pay all that extra money? There's no point.
Yeah. I feel like it's like what you said, where us people, we take our own diets and what we need and we put into our horses. So, it's like, oh, my horse needs the fanciest salt. So you get that. Meanwhile, realistically, it's like not the case at all. So the one
No.
thing you brought up is the whole the respiratory stuff, which I've actually purchased some products of yours to help with one of my horses. And I know a lot of us are hauling horses a lot. So either they're being stalled and breathing in pneumonia and dust, but also transporting them and going to these events. So what would you recommend for us to help our horses' lungs while we're traveling, and just, the natural effects of them being in a trailer with their food?
Well, I mean, yeah, there's a lot to, if you're just talking about the respiratory, I mean, the trailers should, you should have air flowing through it. I mean, ideally, it should, even in the wintertime. I mean, you don't want the draft going directly on the horse, obviously, but you want air moving through it. And I think we, again, as humans, like, well, it's cold out, my horse is going to get cold. Well, their thermal neutral zone can go pretty low if they have, especially if you've allowed them to grow their winter coat. So again, just don't have direct drafts on them, but definitely, keep the vents open so there's air turning over in the stall. Forget a lot of times too about trailering horses is the amount they sweat when they trailer. They lose significant amount of electrolytes and fluid, especially in the early going. Even if horses that are acclimatized to trailering will still lose a lot. Even, the most seasoned horse, getting in a trailer and driving somewhere is a pretty foreign concept to them. So they do sweat a lot. So like preloading again with the salt or electrolytes, making sure they're well hydrated before you trailer anywhere is absolutely essential. And then again, if it's a long haul, you want forage in front of them so they have something to do while they're on the trailer and they can eat and keep something in their stomach.
Yeah.
Ulcers.
Yeah.
There's things you can do there too in terms of feeding before you're trailing, using things like a bit of alfalfa or alfalfa cubes and even oil. So putting some oil into the diet, or even syringing like 60 cc's of oil like an hour before they go. Reduce gastric emptying, so you keep food in the stomach longer, and also actually helps to coat the stomach a little bit, provide some protection particularly if you're going on long hauls, which should be stopping frequently, and again feeding and watering the horse.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. What type of oil are you referring to?
In this case, like honestly, any type of oil is fine. You're really just looking for the slowing of the gastric emptying, so it's more stays in the stomach longer, and again the coating from it. Something like flax oil or like the W3 oil, something that's high in omega-3s is always going to be healthier choice. But when you're just from the physical characteristics, it doesn't really matter. Any liquid vegetable oil will do. Okay,
good to know. I actually didn't even think of that, but it is even the same with people where you want to, give ourselves fats so we slow down our digestion, and it's, it just kind of makes it a more gradual type process of digesting, not instant. With regards to, some of these performance horses, just discussing the proteins that we're giving, you're saying we're giving too much protein, maybe not enough carbs, or we're not sure even where they're getting their energy from to perform these tasks. Can you just go over that a little bit of really what that type of well-balanced diet should look like for more geared towards performance horses?
That's a broad question. Largely, it depends on what you're trying to do. Like how you want to feed, say, a 100-mile endurance horse, or versus a jumping horse, versus a eventing horse, versus a barrel racer, can all be kind of vastly different in the concepts you're trying to do. We were just speaking about this today. It's funny because any performance horse, speed or height in jumping is usually a big factor. And it's like, first order principles of physics. What's the number one thing you want to reduce to increase speed? And it's weight. You want to get weight down as low as possible, right? So, whether it be thoroughbreds, obviously they use weight as a handicap. They've been working for years, lightening up race bikes and putting lift on horses and saddles, going to synthetic materials, lightening those up, different things. That's a big thing. But from the feeding standpoint, that's one consideration you want to put in there is like, you can look at feeds that have very different water holding capacities. So something like bee pulp obviously has a very high water holding capacity. So for an endurance horse, that can be a great thing to feed because it can be a reservoir essentially of electrolytes and water for you when you're going long distances. if you're a barrel racer and you're talking like, tenths, hundredths of a seconds difference in speed, you probably don't want to load up on beet pulp before you're going to the event. Then you have to take this all into consideration of like again, the welfare of the horse. You don't want to feed a diet that's going to have negative impacts on welfare, recovery, or the long-term health of the horse. And so a lot of the times it's about tweaking. And I will get to sound a bit like a broken record here, but the number one thing you want to look at is the forage. And most times we find people have no idea what's in their forage. It hasn't been analyzed. They know what it kind of looks like, but it's not given enough consideration in the total diet, yet it's providing the majority of the nutrients. It's providing the majority of the fiber and the ballast that's in the gut. So the first thing we do when we're looking at performance horse diets is look at the forage source, and then preferably select a forage source that's appropriate for the event they're doing. And then we can mention protein, and there's a focus on feeding protein because they want muscle, we want top line and things like that. But just feeding protein doesn't build muscle. Like, exercise is what builds muscle. And so long as you provide the appropriate amino acids in the correct quantity, protein synthesis is going to be maximized, and the amount of exercise they're doing or strain they're doing is going to dictate, I guess, to some extent, how fast that protein synthesis occurs. And it's pretty rare that we see there's significant deficiencies in amino acids. In fact, it's usually the opposite. There's too much. And there's been a few studies looking at racehorses in particular where they really amino acid balance the diet down to quite a low protein level. I think 7-8% crude protein, but it's very tightly balanced, and they're getting much better performance out of the horses. So the idea that amino acids build or protein builds muscle is true, but you want to be careful with how you're feeding it and how you're formulating it for optimal performance as well. And I think people miss that, particularly with protein.
Right.
Talking about carbohydrates and different feeds, a lot of times people are like, well, you have to, if my horse is working or say a 3-day eventer, well, I have to have some kind of feed to feed. When I say feed, I mean hard feed, commercial feeds, or grains, what most people refer to. They've done studies with standardbreds where they maintain them on a strictly 100% forage diet and were able to maintain their weight and actually perform at a very high level. Their performance was no different than horses that were being fed. So this idea that you have to have grain to feed a high performance horse is completely false. In fact, what you want to do most times is, select the appropriate forage. If that's not enough in terms of energy, you look at going to soluble fiber sources, things like beet pulp, soy hulls, or rice bran, all options you can put in there. And then largely fat sources is what you want to start adding to get the energy content up. This way you're optimizing gut health, optimizing the health of the horse, and giving it all the nutrients it actually needs.
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I have heard recently just about the forage concept, and hearing you say it again, it's like that's the number one thing that they're eating in front of their faces all day. So how important that is to be giving them that as opposed to, like that little scoop of grain or whatever that you think is making a difference. So with the forage idea, how would people go about like I guess this is more geared towards, we're barrel racers. So in the winter versus summer, like, is there a way that we can kind of manage their forage intake in a more accurate level based on the season or when we're performing?
Yeah, like ideally what you want to do is select a forage based on what you're doing. So if you're out of season, say in the winter, you're not competing, so the horse is working a lot less, then you want to go to a lower quality forage because you don't want to limit their intake. You want them actually eating as much as possible. So they're eating it for as many hours a day as possible. And so as their workload lowers down, you go to lower quality. And then as, if you come to spring, you can utilize pasture. I mean, pasture is the cheapest way to feed a horse. And especially if they're in work, you can strip grazing or just rotating paddocks and things like that to optimize intake. And then most pastures will far exceed the need or requirement for energy or protein. So again, there's no need for supplementation of grains in that case. But if you are feeding conserved forages, dry hays, you would just again select the hay you're doing. So higher energy, slightly lower fiber NDF hay. And I know one of the main kickbacks we get is, well, we don't know what's in there. And so this is where we keep pushing test. I mean, people are willing to go spend hundreds of dollars on a supplement, but not willing to spend $50 on a hay test. It's like, it's honestly, because this is again the main source of everything, whether, minerals, calories, and protein are going to come from the hay. So if you have no idea whether it's 7% or 13%, I mean, that's a huge difference in what you would need to fortify around that diet. And you can't do it from just looking. You can have a hay that's been bleached in the sun, doesn't look that great. It's much higher quality than one that can be extremely green, but is more mature. A lot of the coloring just has to do with like the length of time it took to harvest it and how much exposure it had to maybe a bit of rain or time in the sun.
Right. Yeah.
So the easiest way to know is to test. And a lot of hay brokers actually do have the test. You just have to ask for them.
Yeah, doesn't hurt to ask.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And definitely just understanding what is actually in their hay is so crucial. So definitely get it tested and get that understanding of what you're actually feeding. So then you can, I guess, create a better plan from there. One thing you talk about that made me just think of the importance of having hay in front of them all the time. And what is the importance? Like, why should we be so keen on making sure horses are eating, especially in regards to, like they start developing gastric ulcers or we're riding them on an empty stomach? Like, what are some of the things that just in regards to their health, I guess, and letting them eat 24/7 and always having hay in front of them?
Yeah, there's actually a really good study that looked at the behavior of horses like on a high fiber or high forage and a low or a high concentrate diet, and looking at the time they spent eating and then what else they were doing besides eating. So obviously on a high concentrate diet, it doesn't take them very long to consume the meal to meet the caloric needs in the day. So their time spent eating was about 25% through the day. And then the high forage one was closer to their optimal, say around 50% of the time they spend eating, which is about normal behavior. We spend about time foraging and eating. So then when I looked at all the other behaviors and added them up, well, they still basically spent 50% of the time eating on the high concentrate diet. They just ate everything else, whether it be the boards, their own manure, bedding, everything else. So there's just this innate drive for horses to seemingly eat for this amount of time. And them to do it, well, they'll figure out ways to do it, or they'll just develop very bad habits. Like we've all seen stall walkers or horses that weave and those types of habits stem from just at some point in time either being completely stressed out or just not having access to forage when they need it. So again, this is why it's so important to come back to selecting the correct forage for your horse, because if your horse isn't working at all, say like it's a pasture puff and you're giving it high quality forage, well, it's going to become overweight. Ponies in particular is a huge problem because they're so efficient at utilizing forage that you give them a high quality forage and they just balloon up. And some of the data you see on their average daily gain on a pony would rival that of beef cattle. It's pretty impressive. Again, just on forages. So selection of the forage is so important in those scenarios.
Mm. And in regards, that makes a lot of sense where I guess if they don't have it, they're going to find a way to do something or create behavior issues, or they get stressed. And then that could even lead to, they're nervous, they're on an empty stomach, they start developing gastric ulcers. And then it's almost like just a cycle that you can't really overcome. So I really want to hear your opinion on the maintenance and I guess the preventative aspect of gastric ulcers. Also, once horses start developing them, what your opinion is on kind of getting it more under control.
So you already made the point about it. If you don't have forage in front of them, you're definitely more prone to gastric ulcers. And that's largely due to the fact that horses are what they call continuous secretors of acid. Like, so the stomach acid is just produced all the time in a horse. And that's because through evolution, there was never a reason to have an off switch. They just evolved, like roamed large areas and ate all the time. So an off switch never became advantageous. In humans, where you could go for long periods of time and not have food, or many other species, we've developed an off switch where we shut the stomach acid production off when we're not consuming food. And then when we do eat food, it turns it on. And so that fact alone right there is why you see a lot of ulceration in horses when you have not optimal conditions or forage feeding conditions. And then you can start moving down the line of why they develop stress for sure. Changing environments and all these things, changing herd mates is a stressful thing for any horse, for any animal. If you stress in the whole dynamic. And so, yes, even in horses that aren't really doing much, you think that horse has no stress in its life. Sometimes we don't understand what is causing them stress, and that can lead to ulceration. And then you move into the performance horse world, right? You just the fact of exercising. I mean, we essentially say, like, if you're competing at even a moderate level, your horse is somewhat prone to ulcers just through being exercised on a regular basis, move place to place. And so you're going to need some prophylactic treatment to prevent ulceration. The go-to on the pharmaceutical side is omeprazole to try and stop the acid production. It is effective in terms of treating ulcers if you follow through with, GastroGuard's the only one that's actually approved for treatment of ulcers. But the issue with it is you're kind of fighting biology, right? So you have this system that wants to secrete acid chronically. You're given a pharmaceutical agent that then inhibits this. So that works, prevents the ulceration or allows it to heal. But then at some point you want to get off the pharmaceutical. And so then you tend to get this rebound effect where they're overproducing acid when they come off. Or worse, what people do is they'll go off and on, right? Say if you're barrel racing, you're only competing on weekends, you're like, well, this is the stressful point, so I'll give them a omeprazole all weekend, and then I'm just going to stop come Sunday night when we get home. So now you're just creating this bouncing up and down where you probably are, getting ulceration, and you're giving it again, and they have mild to chronic ulceration all the time. Whereas if you give something that helps, like coat or protect the stomach as a preventative, that's usually a better option. Especially, and if the horse is in competition, it's going to be at risk for ulcers. So you're better off to just start on something. Our product is visceral that we use to help prevent ulcers, help horses with ulcers. To just start on it before and stay on it during the whole competition season, then wait till it gets really bad and have to treat it afterwards. Because depending on where the ulcers are, if they're severe enough, it can take up to 3 months in a treatment protocol to clear them up.
So like the treatment plus your product, which is this visceral. So can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. Again, it came about from vets treating with GastroGuard. So GastroGuard is extremely expensive. Anybody that's on here that's used it knows that. And after you spend $1,000 for a month's treatment or more, and you stop, and your horse just immediately relapses within 3 to 5 days, you're like, well, why did I spend all that money? And then the next thought that goes through your head is, this is what I have to spend every month for the rest of this horse's life while I compete with it. Obviously that is great, a great outcome or option. And so the vets were like, okay, we know like certain ingredients like lecithin help coat the stomach. We just, let's make a product with that in it. And I was like, okay, yeah, there's good research on it, but it's not going to do it on its own. And so we basically came up with, through just, mounds and amount of literature, and said, okay, these components together should really get us what we want, where we help protect the stomach, we put the building blocks in place to help regenerate the tissue, help the cells turn over even a little bit faster than normal, and then enhance actual mucin production in the entirety of the gastrointestinal tract. And then at the same time, as we're talking about it, we're like, well, we might as well put some stuff in there for the hindgut, because half the time people haven't scoped the horse. They don't know if the issue is actual gastric ulceration, or it could be leaky gut, or it could be something else, even in the small intestine, right? So we said, well, let's cover them from front to back. That's basically how that product came about, though, was to treat post GastroGuard. Now, people have started using it just as a preventative. It seems to work extremely well, even for that, or just on its own in cases that aren't maybe like really severe. So it's really, it's very case dependent. Gastric ulceration is a huge issue, and I know, like, through scoping, like thoroughbreds, for instance, there's horses that show 0 symptoms, and you scope them, and it looks like a hand grenade went off in their stomach. And then there's other horses where you'd think somebody shot them in the stomach, and then you scope them, and there's just the mildest of an ulcer in there. And so there's almost like no rhyme or reason to how the symptoms compare to the actual physiology of gastric ulceration.
Mhm. Interesting. Yeah, that's really cool. And I definitely think a lot of people are interested in knowing, that type of preventative or like the next step. It's like, okay, we spent $1,000. So what's the next step? So I find that interesting because as someone that, we have performance horses, I think most people they're trailering their horses. The horses, might be in that stressful situation. So just really trying to minimize the impact on their guts as much as possible. So that's awesome. Um, that I am curious. So we're about the halfway mark. I kind of would like to open up a couple questions here. If there's any listeners that had a question for Scott that's specific to their needs and see if he can give you the best answer. If in oh okay, who's first? Amanda?
Hey, can you guys hear me okay?
I hear you.
Okay, perfect. I had a question kind of, or I guess maybe a comment, and Scott, you can kind of give your thoughts on it. There's definitely a lot of products, especially in the barrel racing or the performance horse world, driven around the idea that, we're at a show, we trailed there, maybe it was stressful, and we're trying to either prevent or undo some dehydration. So there's a lot of like oral pastes. Now, I've kind of heard that those can be pretty fleeting electrolytes like into where they need to go. Like it sounds like salt's a much more simple and cost-effective fix for that kind of situation.
So a little bit to unpack here. One, oral electrolyte paste have been shown to actually cause issues with gastric ulceration because they basically sit as a lump in the stomach, and just the osmotic gradient causes cell rupture and damage. So you can actually induce ulcers with electrolyte paste. So I'm not a big fan of that. So for barrel racers, yeah, salt's probably your number one go-to, depending on what level you're at, I guess, and how fit your horse is and how hard you're working. Because if you look at a nutritional composition of a diet, they're getting more than enough potassium from hay, if that's assuming you're feeding enough forage. They're getting the calcium and magnesium from there as well. So the salt's really what they're missing, and the use of salt will solve a lot, like I would say 90% of people's problems, just from a hydration standpoint. When you get into like custom formulated electrolytes, those can be used as well on top of adding salt. And so you want to start actually before you leave, because you want to almost be hyperhydrated before you leave, because your horse is going to get mildly dehydrated on the trailer ride, even a relatively short one. And then as soon as you get there, you want to basically make sure they're getting rehydrated again. Now, it's like it's a fine balance here. Like you don't want them loaded with water, excess amount of water, because you want them to go fast. And we talked about weight, but at the same time, they're doing short runs. But if they're sitting around throughout the day, you probably want to make sure that they get or electrolytes throughout the day. So if you're doing multiple runs, because it's shocking, even though they're short, how much it can boost them up. Because if they get even mildly dehydrated, it's just like people, you get headaches, you just get lethargic, you're not feeling as good. So, anybody in barrel racing that maybe experienced later on in the day, their horse just doesn't have that same kind of pop. It's probably just a mild dehydration and not providing enough electrolytes, which is easily overcome by either using a commercial electrolyte solution or just plain good old salt. But I would stay away from the paste though.
Cool. Does that answer your question? Okay, we got another one from Catherine. Go ahead, Catherine.
I was just wondering, you guys can hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay. I was just wondering, I know you guys have a product called Gut Health as well. I was wondering if you could explain the difference in the gut health compared to the visceral. Like I have a gelding that has been diagnosed, has been scoped with ulcers, and I have a mare that she has not been diagnosed with ulcers, but I think she could be the type that is prone to it. And as you were talking about, like any horse that's in work with stress, it totally makes sense. I'm just I'm wondering what might be a better route for her. Like she bloats a lot too. So anyway, yeah, I was just wondering the difference between the two.
Like, are you referring to the optimum digestive health?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's just targeted at high in gut. I mean, probiotics do have an impact in the stomach as well. That one's really just targeted at high in gut health. So looking at yeast enzymes and some, pre and probiotics essentially in there. Where the visceral has all that, as well as the products to help with the gastric ulceration. So if you even remotely suspect that the stomach's involved, or there might be gastric ulceration and risk of, let's definitely go with the visceral, because the optimum digestive health is going to do very little at the stomach level. I mean, there's some evidence that probiotics do help a little bit, just more from the standpoint of keeping pathogenic bacteria out of essentially an open wound in the stomach, but that's not enough to in horses to help heal it, because it's the acid. Like in some of the human studies, they are actually pretty effective because it's a bacteria that causes ulceration in most humans, and so the probiotics will actually sometimes outcompete the specific type of bacteria that causes ulcers in humans. But that's not the case in horses. That bacteria is not involved. It's physical erosion from the acid, and so you do physical protection of the stomach lining. And the optimum digestive health doesn't have that in it, where visceral does.
Awesome. I totally believe in the visceral. My gelding, I did the gastrogard treatment and then I followed up with the visceral, and it's made a world of the difference for him. So I like the product.
Thank you. We appreciate the comment.
Perfect. Thank you, Catherine. If does anyone else have a question? Because I thought of one that relates to my own situation. What would you say? So I have a mare that I bred and she'll be due this coming spring. So is there anything that you can suggest for when you get a foal on the ground, how nutritionally that we should approach it? And just kind of maybe, like the first stages of a newborn up to like a year, like what type of things should we be doing?
So in this case, I do think you want to start to take some notes from human nutrition, where when you're feeding a foal, you want to think about the mare first and how you're feeding that mare. And again, we see a lot of kind of mistakes in feeding brood mares. This idea that she's eating for two. That whole idea. Where in reality, the energy and protein requirements don't go up that much. In the very end of during the high rate of growth, they go up somewhat, but you'd be surprised how easily those are met. But what you really want to do in that, especially as the fetus is developing, is ensure you do have adequate mineral and vitamins balance in there for the broodmare. And then you want good evidence is using specific fatty acids like EPA and DHA, those long chain fatty acids that would come typically out of algae or fish oil, to really kind of boost up the health and immunity. There's a few other things you can do. Like, again, we just talked about the optimum digestive health. It does increase colostrum production. So again, you're looking at some very specific things here, but when the foal's born, optimizing IgG intake or colostrum intake right away is going to do wonders for improving the health of them. So it's not even like a long-term nutrition program. It's just ensuring that you've optimized that intake and the foal's getting a good feed within the first 6 hours, ideally. After being born, and there's significant quantities of immunoglobulins in that colostrum. And so some of the feeding strategies really help with that. What you don't want to do is overfeed the broodmare, get her overweight. That will have an impact on the foal as well. So in most cases, particularly with horses, we leave the foal with the dam for up to but the longer you can leave the foal with the mother nursing, the better it's going to be. The less you have to do too, the less you have to intervene, because realistically they don't really need a whole lot as long as they're getting milk. They're allowed to exercise. I mean, that's, again, I know it's not nutrition, but getting them outside as much as possible. Ideally, they'd be outside almost all the time, not even ever really coming into a stall, because they've done, talking about ulcers, they've done studies in foals where bringing them outside, foals get ulcers, gastric ulcers, when they're housed in stalls. So the more they can be outside, the better. From a nutritional standpoint, if you're going to be feeding the broodmare, the foal's going to naturally just start to eat some of the broodmare feed, which is usually sufficient. In most cases, again, because if they're still with the brood mare getting milk, that'll provide. So you will, as they start to grow, you're going to again want to enhance some of the mineral and vitamin supplementation, because per pound of body weight or per kilo of body weight, the mineral and vitamin requirements are actually quite a bit higher than they would be for a mature horse. But again, typically it's pretty easy to meet their energy and protein needs through some quality forage. So because you're going from the highest quality food for milk, you want to, when you start feeding, when the dry feeds are pasture to the foal, you want to start with the highest quality. And then as they grow, you start to go, lower the quality a little. You definitely don't want to grow the foals too fast. And I know everybody wants to see a nice, big, healthy, like no ribs on a foal, but especially as they're growing, you're better off actually having them a bit thin. You don't want to be deficient, and certainly not in protein, but you could be being a little light in energy is actually beneficial to be overfeeding energy to young animals. Structure, you have less joint problems, less OCD issues. Again, you want to make sure there's enough protein, but from an energy standpoint, you always want to be really careful, especially with young animals.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So based on some of your products, what would you recommend for my situation? Like, she eats well, she's a little overweight, like she just kind of chills. She's not bad, but she's a little thicker, I'd say. But what is the mineral type supplement or something that you'd suggest that I should add into her diet?
The one that balances the diet the best, honestly. So I mean, we have on media, obviously, but if you have a forage sample, that's ideal, where we can say, okay, here's the voids we're going to fill, versus just guessing. So the one that balances the diet is always the correct answer. It's never one off, like this one off the shelf is better than this one.
Right.
Now, having said that, like Omni is balanced off based off thousands of forage samples, so there's a good chance it's probably going to fit the bill. Your forage is really out in left field in terms of composition. I assume that what else is you say is a little chunky, so you're feeding grain now as well?
A bit, yeah, some maternity feed, only like half a scoop, but she doesn't do a whole lot. And I try not to overfeed her hay, but it's a little tough because she's with some other horses and they're all pretty on a decently strict diet, but she's the boss. So she is usually the one that's always eating.
Yeah. I mean, and that's hard too, right? Like, you're feeding in group situations, you're always going to have the alpha that's going to give more than the.
So would you say maybe not even to be giving, like at this moment, she's due more in the summer, so in July. So we have a bit of time. Like, is there a time when you should start giving her more nutrition in that sense, or the whole term, or near the end of the term?
No, like just closer to the end of the term. I mean, you do, again, it depends on the forage quality, because like they'll just start eating more, right, as the demand increases. So if the forage quality is matching kind of their nutrient needs, they'll just eat a bit more to cover off the difference. And then, you just need something like omega to get the minerals and vitamins balanced. And then, a bit of ground flax is actually a great choice. High omega-3s, you get some protein, you get some soluble fiber. So you don't need to go to a commercial feed even at this point. Like, a need for commercial feed, honestly, you can always make a diet without them. Versus got here a long time without commercial feed. So they're easier though, obviously, than some at times, but you really just need the minerals and vitamin. And then, again, like if you're thinking about rebreeding, full health, things like that, things like the DHA and EPA can really make a difference, right? Because they're not going to get that from plant. You have to supplement it. The conversion in the body is just really low, and it is in all mammals. And so supplementation is really the only way to boost it up.
Okay, cool. That was a great answer. Thank you so much. Who was next? We have Casey who had a question.
Yes, thanks.
Yep. There you go.
So, Scott, you had mentioned about the respiratory system in relation to the environment. But I was wondering as well, I had read somewhere that the equine respiratory system is like the limiting factor for performance. So if we can improve the health of the respiratory system, that can help boost their performance. I'm not sure if that's true, but aside from optimizing their environment and also making sure that they're fit for the job that they're doing, obviously, is a big part of their respiratory function. But is there nutrients that we should be focusing on, or certain things that can help to help the function of their respiratory system?
I mean, honestly, the biggest impact is going to be the quality of the air. Like if they're in a barn, like that's number one. So before you spend any money on supplements, get the ammonia knocked down, get the air turnover where it should be. And I mean, like not just out in the aisles, where the horse is actually at. Like there's a big difference between like, you know, and even like when the horse is laying down in the stall, the ammonia will be a lot more concentrated down there. And there's things you can do to kind of knock down the ammonia in barns, but air turnover is the best. I know you're asking about nutrition, but yeah, the horse is unique in that basically it's, you know, it's pattern is tied to the gallop, right? Like they're going to take one breath per extension and contraction. And so the more air you can jam in that breath, the oxygen you can diffuse across the lungs. Actually, just getting underway with, I mean, there's some work with spirulina as an individual ingredient, a few other things out there that have shown improvements in respiratory function. Certainly not a cure-all for something like heaves or anything like that, but showing like less inflammatory response, less inflammatory markers. So we're just doing a trial right now on a product blend to see if we can improve some lung function and basically reduce the inflammatory response in the lungs to things like dust or allergens and things like that. Vitamin C, horses do produce their own vitamin C, but there's some evidence with higher doses of vitamin C from a nutrition standpoint that can improve well. Again, just the rest of the diet, having everything balanced. I mean, any like, you know, even zinc and copper obviously are involved in inflammatory processes. So having the entire diet balance is so important in these cases for improving overall health and function.
That's really interesting. I've actually used the spirulina from Mad Barn a couple of months ago. One of my horses was coughing a little bit, and they don't live inside. They live outside 24/7. And she, after one, I think I was halfway through the bag when she stopped coughing. So I think I'm going to continue to use that over the summer when I'm competing. But yeah, since my horses live outside, I don't really have a lot of environmental air quality issues since they're just outside 24/7. So I want to just make sure I give them everything possible. So I'll be keeping my eyes out for what comes next from this trial that you're mentioning.
You should shoot us an email because we'll like let people basically trial it now, I guess, as well. Be careful what I say. Don't but that's kind of how it came, you know, the product came to be. Like just, you know, looking at the evidence, spirulina, and a few other things, we made a blend, and again, people were, you know, basically using it and seeing definite improvement. So when you get that kind of anecdotal evidence, you're like, oh, okay, well, obviously there's some research in spirulina and some of the other ingredients we had mixed in there. We're like, okay, well, let's pursue this now and, you know, do scoping, lung lavages, everything, and get some data on this and see actually what the impact is or what the mode of action is for a product like this.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you.
I personally would be interested in that. I have a horse that we've done a lot of. He had some lung infection when we got him and never really fully healed. Like he was only 2. So now that I'm start riding him, he still has a cough. And I actually from KC decided to buy the spirulina, and it's too early to say, but he still has a little bit of a cough when we're like really riding, but I'm really hoping to get it under control. There was a question that I got asked, is there any harm in feeding the visceral for extended periods of time, as in like years?
6. I know we've had a number of clients on it this long, so none that we are aware of. No, there's, and certainly the ingredients that have been tested with long-term use, there's no,
Okay.
there's no.
Perfect. Did anyone else have any questions that they'd like to ask? Now is your time.
Hey Shelby, I had one more. I guess it kind of goes back to your comment about feeding for like endurance versus sprint and how that can change. Um, is there any value in like obviously we don't want to change our feed ingredients around all the time and throw all kinds of kind of curveballs at horses, but I'm curious to as if like for example, like dead of summer, super hot, you've got maybe a big week ahead of you with some really long hours. Is there any value to like maybe adding, say, like a beet pulp or something that's going to give them a little more volume, or trying to feed them up ahead of time? Or is the focus, should the focus be on recovery after the fact? I know that's kind of a broad question, but
So the focus should always be on recovery. It's probably the most overlooked area of improving performance, but particularly in the racehorses where everything seems to be on the front end. Give it to them before the event. Done the event, you just throw them with some food, put them away. But the opportunity actually for improving performance or future performance actually is in the recovery period and doing the right things then. Like let's start talking targeted nutrition, feeding a little higher protein meal at that time within the 1 or 2 hour window after a heavy exercise. Not necessarily during an event where you have to go again. That may not be the best option. A little bit of protein, again with some sugars and some electrolytes to really help them recover fast and get ready to go again would be a good option. And you're absolutely right, Amanda. You don't want to be taking diets and just radically changing them before an event. But things like beet pulp, and you can get them accustomed to it just by feeding a small amount on a regular basis. And then as you come to event, maybe build up. So you do have that, like you talked about, that reservoir in there of electrolytes and fiber, but also realize if you're feeding beet pulp in a situation with speed, you're adding weight too, because you are adding water holding capacity. So it's a balance here. And we don't have there is no perfect answer for this, but this is part of it, come back to the model. I don't want to harp on this too much, but the reason we build these models is that we can run a million simulations of how that's going to, the outcome's going to be when we have really, really good data to put into it. And we can come up with much more optimal strategies versus doing trial and error, essentially, which takes forever to kind of get to an optimal place. But you definitely are options for altering the feed program. But again, I think, these things that you're talking about are like a 5% change in the diet from your day-to-day routine. They're not like these massive changes, because any massive change in a horse's diet is going to create more problems than it's going to ever help. So you just want a good, consistent diet pretty much all the time. And then if it is going to be a long weekend, there's things that, you can start loading like electrolytes and things like that to help get them through it better and help them recover faster and keep them eating. Honestly, just keep them eating the food that they're on.
Perfect. Hopefully that answers your question, Amanda.
Actually, had me think of a
yes,
question.
thank you.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Casey.
Yeah, that recovery conversation, it brought up a question for me. I've been looking into a little bit of like how chromium acts in metabolism and stuff, and I know it's good for insulin sensitivity or metabolic cases, but I've been kind of interested in it for recovery. And so I've been looking at the magnachrome supplement, and I know chromium can help with glucose uptake by muscle. So I was wondering if that would be a possible benefit to feeding something like the magnachrome to improve recovery or replenishing muscle glycogen or anything like that.
Yeah, this is a good question. I can't give you a good answer on the chromium. Is one of those things where, there's definitely data on it in glucose metabolism, but there's actually no known experiment for it. We know that it's involved in glucose uptake, and there's been work in humans, certainly in weightlifting and different things like that, showing and it seems to be about 50-50 whether it's benefit. Like Omni-80 and amino traits both have chromium added to them. I would be more apt to say just balance your diet with one of those two as a mineral and vitamin. The chromium will come from there than trying to add something like the IR supplement to get the boost from it. Just given that I'm not confident it's going to make a big difference, basically. So it's from a performance standpoint, I would say the return on investment is probably not going to be great with the MagnaCro supplement. I would just go with balancing the diet with a good mineral and vitamin that does have it in there already and get it that way.
Yeah, makes sense.
Thanks, Casey. All right. Does anyone else have a question for Scott? Is there anything, Scott, that we haven't covered that you would like us to know, or anything that you wish more equestrians knew about nutrition?
I think honestly, the biggest thing is use a nutritionist. Like, I get that a lot of horse owners, it's only one or two horses, and this is partly why we built this model too, was to make experts available to people with only one or two horses, so you're not stuck guessing, and being able to use our data to say, yes, this is a balanced diet, and this is the right way to feed our horse. And the second thing is, when you have data, especially if you're in the performance horse world, you're getting rid of bias, or hopefully getting rid of bias. Where when you do something or make a change in the diet, you have it there. Like, if it's in Mad Barn Feed or whatever, you're like, this is my diet. We fed this for a while, and these were the outcomes. Well, then we changed these things, and this is the new diet. And like, did whatever variable it was you were hoping that it improved, did it actually improve? And taking a more analytical look at the way we're feeding horses, and less anecdotal, because, well, we all know there's no shortage of anecdotal in the horse world, like in terms of, not just the horse world, human supplements. There's a lot of the way many of them get sold. We want to change that. We want it to be science-based. We want to be, give people the ability to use data to make decisions as opposed to using anecdotal evidence.
Mm-hmm. No, that's great. So with that, where could people find that type of information with you guys, or how could they connect with you?
So we do offer free diet evaluations. And so if you send in a diet evaluation request, we set it up on a separate platform called madbarnfeed.com, which is going to be the basis basically of our model development. But it allows you to go in and see, we're not just making these numbers up. These are numbers that come from the NRC in terms of nutrient requirements. So when you input and say, this is what I'm feeding my horse, and it tells you you're deficient in this, this, and this, and in excess of this, that's just, that's just numbers. It's not us like trying to sway or persuade you in any one way. And then you make good decisions based on that, on how to improve the diet and put the right products in there. And so you are optimizing the performance of your horse, and hopefully in a cost-effective manner. I mean, it's not. So I get people want to do this as effectively as possible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Perfect. Anyone else? While we're approaching the hour mark, this is your chance to get to ask Scott a real live question. I'm trying to think of maybe not. Maybe that's it.
Hi, Scott. I have a really quick question. Just speaking on pasture puffs, which you touched on a little bit, and the top line issue, do you have any suggestions for aged pasture horses? Because I seem to have a lot more trouble keeping top line on them.
Yeah, exercise. Honestly, I don't know. Like, I don't think there's nothing in supplement form other than making them fat that's going to add top line. And as they get older, I get it. It's just like people, right? They're going to lose the muscle mass. They're going to lose the ability to basically gain muscle. So you do things like, if the horse is getting older and you can't ride, or it doesn't take to riding as much, you can pony them, right? And just keep them moving, get them lots of exercises. I mean, there's a ton of great exercises out there in different ways to get them to stretch and move. And it's time, get to spend time with your horse doing those types of things. Both of you get an exercise, and that's going to probably help with the top line more than any nutritional intervention. Again, this is all assuming that you are providing adequate nutrition for the horse, that they are getting enough protein and energy to meet their needs. You really need to go out to the physical side of things to start developing top line. It does bring, to my earlier comment about anecdotal versus science-based evidence. You see like, oh, I fed this supplement and, so whatever amino acid supplement. And a week later, my horse had all this top line on it. Well, that's first of all, something anyways, it's the answer for top line, honestly, is just exercise, in my opinion.
Good answer. Makes sense. Anyone else have something they'd like to ask before we wrap up?
I want to ask now if Christine has a comment to that, if that's if it's Christine from.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. It's definitely a hard row to hoe with old horses, and it's always an uphill battle. So no, exercise is a fantastic solution. I completely agree.
Mm-hmm.
You should tell them your credentials if this is who I think it is.
Yeah,
she's more education than I do, so that's why I'm saying that.
No, I wouldn't say that. You definitely have a fantastic reputation. I'm Dr. Christine Latham. I did my master's at the University of Kentucky looking at amino acid supplementation in aged horses. And on a more personal note, I have had several old horses. Right now, my oldest is 29. So I am fighting a good fight against that loss of top line.
Wow. Well, it's nice to meet you, Christine. So happy you came.
No,
maybe you can have her on for a future podcast.
That's
Her
literally
research is super interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we'll have to connect.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Perfect.
There are, you talk about top line, there are some other solutions, but again, that's in the pharmaceutical realm. Like I could age myself and mention like Ben Johnson and stuff, and things like that, but most people don't want to go down that road, nor should they.
No, I completely agree. I think diet and exercise, big emphasis on exercise, is a great solution to a lot of different problems.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Both horses and humans.
Yes,
Yep.
exactly. There's no pill, not usually.
No, there really isn't. I mean, we as humans really want to believe there is. I think there's just not. It's 100 little things you're going to do right that are going to make the difference. And I would say when I talk to people about the research and what my real passion is this last 1%, right? Finding that last 1% of performance, and it's not going to be some huge thing that you do. It's going to be all the little things you do right that lead into it.
Yeah, I love that. Definitely something for everyone to keep in mind when they're looking for that one solution. It's all those little building blocks that you put in the effort and the understanding of what you're actually doing that's going to make that 1% difference if that's what you're trying to strive to get. So yeah.
A little bit better all the time. They say just a little bit every day, just a little bit.
Exactly. It's a journey. It's a process.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Perfect. Okay. Does anyone else have anything that they'd like to say? Don't want to keep Scott here too long. But if we are,
sorry.
Go on.
I was just going to mention, like I mentioned, we do the diet evaluations. By all means, you go on, diet evaluation, give us some information. If you don't like the interface, just email us, and one of the nutritionists will set up your diet for you. And you're even free to use the software with an independent nutritionist. Say, oh, we don't like MadBar, we don't want to listen to them. Software, it's a great tool, and have an independent nutritionist have a look at it if you want.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Perfect. I appreciate that. So everyone can go over to MadBarn, get insight, or email MadBarn to learn more. And yeah, I think you guys have Instagram and Facebook as well. I believe I'll just add everything to the show notes for anyone that's interested. They can just click the links easily and get their nutrition all taken care of with MadBarn. So on my behalf, and I think everyone else, Scott, I just want to say thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us tonight.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me on. It was a pleasure. And if you have any questions, by all means, reach out.
Yep, for sure. We'll do. And everyone else. Okay. Well, have a good evening and we'll talk later. I'll let you know when everything's up. Everything's
Perfect.
live. Yeah. Okay.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Shelby. Have a good night.
You as well.
Thanks, Shelby.
You're welcome. Okay. End meeting.